Welcome to Friendeavor, the podcast, the weekly podcast where we explore the highs and lows of friendship with your hosts, Danielle and Kayla.
As we journey through life, our friendships often evolve and change, ebb and flow, and sometimes even come to an end. Danielle and I are lifelong advocates for the power of friendship, and we are here to guide all of us through the many challenges and joys that come with building and maintaining strong, meaningful connections with those around us.
Join us each week as we deep dive into the intricacies of friendship, from navigating conflicts to fostering new relationships and everything in between. With insightful interviews, personal anecdotes, and expert advice, Friendeavor is the perfect podcast for anyone looking to strengthen their bonds with the people they love.
So, whether you are on the go, taking care of chores, or just settling in, get ready to explore the world of friendship on Friendeavor, the podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Friendeavor.
Welcome back.
We are on episode 5 of Friendeavor, the podcast. We really hope you've been enjoying all the episodes we've put out so far, and I don't know, this feels like a milestone to me, reaching 5 episodes.
Oh yeah.
All right, so as we get into October, we are kicking off the month by talking about introversion and extroversion. Kayla, when you hear those two terms, what do you think of?
Okay, so up until when we first started recording this podcast, I thought that being introverted meant feeling very nervous around big crowds, preferring to be alone. And then that extroverted meant that you always want to be around people all the time and you feel anxious when you're alone. So pretty much the opposite. Then we talked about it and you were like, actually, like I've read up on it, and being introverted actually means you're more recharged when you're alone. And that's the way you charge.
Yeah.
And yeah, that changed the whole definition for me.
So I'm so glad you brought that up, the two types of ways to look at it, because we are actually going to start off with the traditional view today. So what society thinks of as like really quiet or really outgoing. So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
We're definitely going to talk about the other thing too. But to kick us off, to understand introversion and extroversion by definition, the traditional definition, introversion refers to a personality trait characterized by a preference. You don't have to always be this way, but a preference for solitary activities and reflection. And then your extroversion involves a preference for social interaction and really just like that external stimuli, whether that's a party, a conversation, an upbeat atmosphere, that kind of thing. Like with everything, there's nothing that's just like one or the other typically in the world. So it's a spectrum, right? Most people don't fall into just one category, just an introvert or just an extrovert. Everyone's going to exhibit a mix of both of these traits, and it's often referred to as an ambivert, which is like a little bit of both.
I feel like I've heard that before, but haven't really like looked into it.
Yeah. And we're not really focusing on the spectrum, but it would not be fair to talk about this topic without acknowledging, like, I am not 100% an extrovert. There are times that I definitely need to be alone, and I thrive alone. It's not that I always have to be in a conversation or out at a party or out in an environment. And we're going to get into all that today, so I don't want to get ahead of myself. But an ambivert, basically, we all fall in that category. But for the sake of today's episode, we're pretty much just going to split it into two categories: introvert and extrovert. All right, you ready for a science lesson?
Yeah, so ready.
We're gonna get into the science of it before we get into all the other stuff, because I feel like if you don't have a background of what you're talking about with a little bit of authenticity to it and like the truth in it, then it's easy just to allow opinion to completely sway how we think of something. And we definitely want to talk about what some scientific evidence is in here. So historically, in this scientific community, I know it seems like one or the other, like it'd be history or science, but scientists from history have used the term introversion and extroversion. They were popularized by Carl Jung, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's Jung. I've seen Jung, I've seen Jung, and I've seen Jung. So we're going to go with Jung. But you know, he was Swiss, so maybe it was Jung. You know what? We're going to say Jung. Carl Jung. Later, psychologists such as Hans Eysenck, again, don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Isabel Briggs Myers that name might ring a bell because that's a very popular personality test, the Myers-Briggs test, contributed to the development of personality theories and assessments. So to talk about this guy, Carl Jung, who really popularized these terms, he was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who lived in the late. He was born in 1875 and lived up into the 1960s. So in this whole expansion of industrial revolution and all this stuff, where we are learning more about who we are as a society. He's known for developing the concepts of introversion and extroversion, which describe different ways people engage in the world. So not just engage with each other, but engage with the world. So this whole idea that Jung came up with, it greatly influenced psychology, and it worked. His work really delved into the exploration of the mind and dreams and that kind of stuff. So we get this concept of introverted and extroverted from this guy.
Nice. Didn't know that.
Yeah. So there are other psychological theories. For example, the other person we talked about, Hans Eisnick, Eisenink. I'm just not doing justice to this man, but that's his name, thereabout. His theory suggests that introverts have a higher level of, and I am getting this from the internet, so cortical stimulation, which makes them more sensitive to stimuli. So to put that into our terms, introverts might have literally in their brain be more sensitive to certain things that make them want to avoid them. So an introvert might not want to be around as many loud noises, or may not, or maybe more sensitive to loud noises, or that kind of thing that makes them not want to have as much external stimulation, therefore causes them to want to be alone more, or that kind of thing. Again,
that makes sense.
We're really splitting people up into two categories here. So it's not every single person who counts themselves as an introvert is more sensitive, but in the world of science, and I use that term loosely, it's possible that the brain of an introvert is more sensitive to this kind of thing. So we got the science, we got all the names and all that, to get a little bit of authenticity and realness to this. But let's talk about some myths and misconceptions. So like we've talked about, you say, or people say introverts are shy. What do you think when you hear that? You think introvert is shy? What comes to mind for you?
I think about maybe a hermit,
Okay.
someone who never wants to go out. Maybe they have a little bit of anxiety when they go out.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who doesn't talk much.
Okay.
And I do consider those all myths, by the way.
There you go. So yeah, that is actually where we get into the real definition, if you will, how we talked about how wanting to be alone versus wanting to be out all the time is the typical understanding, but it's really about energy. And that's where we kind of get into busting these myths and misconceptions. Introversion is, according to all the research I've done, is really about energy preference. And I use that term loosely again, because we all know that energy is like, it's a thing, but it's not like the thing, right?
Right.
So it's really about preference of environment and how your energy is expended. So it's not necessarily shyness. Introverts may enjoy socializing, but need a significant time alone to recharge after. So they might be able to walk into a party and say hi to everyone and take a lap around the room, but then when they get home, they're not like, okay, let's go do another one. They're like, okay, hold on, that took all the energy I could give to that, and I definitely need some time to recharge.
Yeah, we're not doing this again for another couple of weeks.
Yeah, give me a break from the party atmosphere. So what do you think when you hear extrovert? So we typically have shyness associated with introverts, and extroverts we typically think attention seeking, or that's kind of like the banner that's tagged to them, like they want everyone's attention on them all the time. Are you familiar with that? Is that like something that you've thought of before?
Not necessarily. I'd never had that perception of extroverts. I don't consider myself an extrovert, but that's not how I would perceive them.
Yeah, go for it.
Attention seeking.
Break it down. What do you think?
See, this is less relatable, so this is just speculation. someone who is genuinely like hyped, like being around big groups of people and loudness and like staying up till 4 a.m. on Friday night, no limits. Like it genuinely is fun for them. um, and yeah, someone who just maybe being alone makes them a little bit nervous.
So I would not say that the term attention seeking would be what comes to mind for me either. But before I get into busting this myth, I could see how that would be the case, right? Like we all know people who would do seemingly anything for a laugh, right? Like put themselves in like compromising situations for their safety, or do something crazy, or take any sort of bet or dare or whatever, all under the guise of they're the funniest, they'll do anything for a laugh, right? We know those people.
Yeah.
But it's wrong to say that every single extrovert just has got to have attention on them all the time, because you know plenty of people who are sociable and love a laugh and love having a good time that are not like demanding that the entire room look at them, right? While extroverts may enjoy attention, and not necessarily it has to be attention on them, it could just be like also giving attention. It's not always about seeking it for themselves. So
Okay.
they might simply feel more comfortable and energized, again going back to that energy thing, in social situations. So the environment with the extra stimuli is what really just activates them, and maybe even is their point of inspiration. It's where they get their next big idea or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
And it could be what like I said, activates traits. So like maybe they're not funny in a small group. Maybe their sense of humor is not as potent in like when they have only a one person audience, but
Oh yeah.
about
I've
that
seen that.
stimuli and the whole group just really, it just pulls it together for them, and they're like the funniest person you met. But unless they are in with that stimuli, then it's like, I mean, I can totally vouch for that. There's something that like having a group of people, it just makes you more like in the moment, and you're vying back and forth in conversation and that kind of thing. So I definitely fall on that spectrum closer to the extrovert side. But going back to, it's not one or the other. I definitely need my quiet time too. We're going to go back to that whole energy and recharging thing in a bit, but we're going to move on to our fourth point, is the difference in communication style. Okay, because in every relationship, healthy communication is vital, but the style might be different. And Kayla, you'll probably be able to speak to this more than I can, because you're in a very engaging atmosphere with your work where you have to, work alongside other people. But just to give you kind of an insight into what we're talking about before we go into that, it is said, if we're splitting people into two groups, that introverts often excel in deep conversation, carefully considering their words. Okay, so like in a loud, stimulating environment, they are not going to be able to think their thoughts, right? They're not gonna be able to think things
Right.
through like they want. They want to be able to consider their words. They might prefer written communication over just a group discussion, right? That kind
That
of thing.
totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And then an extrovert loves a group discussion, or finds energy in being around people and bouncing ideas off of people, getting feedback in real time. Small talk doesn't really bother them. Sometimes extroverts really, really hate small talk, because it's like, again, how can you consider your words so deeply when it's something, when the topic is so lame as the weather or something like that,
Yeah.
So extroverts can usually engage with multiple individuals at the same time, um, and that kind of thing. So if you would, can you speak to your experience with that in your work environment or any other environment?
Yeah. I definitely find that being in smaller groups, I am able to choose my words more precisely and kind of build the arrangement in my head before I say it out loud. And I do find myself saying stupid things when I am on the spot, or I'm in big settings, and I have to get this out there before the topic is changed because there's so much going on,
That's
and
a
I
good
end up saying
point.
something stupid. So I definitely lean more toward like talking to a small group of 4 or 5 people where like it's quiet, one person is talking at a time, and it's like when it's my turn and I have like planned what I'm going to say, I'm going to say it.
Yeah.
So I definitely find that like in my work environment, in meetings and everything, the way our meetings are set up anyway is we take turns talking. So I know when it's going to be my turn and I've already maybe like written down things I'm going to say. So,
Okay.
yeah.
That is so true about the rapid fire discussion of a large group. And I feel bad when I'm with people who I know want to contribute, but it's like it's going so fast. And one opinion that is talked about or whatever can literally shift the entire course of the conversation. And what you wanted to say is lost. And then you have to be like,
Yeah.
going back to that thing. And then I completely understand that could be a very difficult thing if you're not one of the facilitators of the discussion.
Right.
Oh, we lost Kayla's video. Hey, you know what? That reminds me. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple, or iHeartRadio, we also have videos of our podcast. We simulcast record on YouTube. So if you prefer to watch your podcast instead of just listen to them, you can hop on over to YouTube. Right now, you'll only be seeing me because we lost Kayla's video for a few minutes. But yeah, check that out. All right. So back to our introvert extrovert discussion. We were talking about thriving in group discussion, that kind of thing. So that's where extroverts are typically going to find their energy in the communication style.
Do you find that extroverts have to be the one leading the discussion to be energized by it?
That is a really good question. So obviously I can only speak to my experience, but I know that in a larger group, say 6, 7, 8, 9 people, I definitely feel way more energized when I'm the one helping facilitate. Like if it's a planned discussion, like it's a group environment where you're working toward a common goal, absolutely like lead the discussion or that kind of thing. I definitely feel more engaged that way. But if it's like a group of friends sitting around, if I'm not one of the ones helping direct the conversation or contributing, I will definitely get lost and just sit back and give up and just like something comes to mind a few months ago. We were sitting around with at a friend's birthday party. It was like a small get together, and there was probably 8 of us there. If I stopped to count, I could, but I would say about 8. And the conversation was volleying between about 4 of us. Everyone was listening and like head nodding and engaging, but because it was only the 4 of us, I felt bad because I felt like other people wanted to be involved, but it was such a fruitfully flowing conversation that it was really hard to jump in for those other people. So if
Yeah.
I had not been one of those people already like going for it, conversation wise, then I definitely feel like I would have been lost and not wanted to engage at all because you're just sitting there listening. And as an extrovert, that would be hard for me to do, especially when I've got things that I think I'd want to contribute. So
Yeah.
it really just depends. And again, I can only speak to myself. So do you find yourself leaning toward we're about halfway through our discussion today, so let's stop and take a little uh insight break. Kayla, where do you think as of right now you fall on the one or the other scale? Obviously we talked a lot about being ambivert, so being both. Where do you think you fall on the introvert extrovert scale?
I think in this kind of like group setting, as far as being the one that's leading the discussion and everything like that, I would fall more on the introvert side. I'm rarely the one leading the discussion in a group setting unless it's a topic that I'm very comfortable with and I know it can just flow naturally for me.
Mm-hmm.
One example I can think of is at the Peak Conference, we got into a conversation, a group of us, about Bible quizzing, and that's a topic I'm very familiar with, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
very confident in my ability to share my thoughts. And
Yeah.
so, I was one of the ones leading that discussion. But I mean, in other settings where it's maybe not a topic I have a ton of experience in, I don't want to say something dumb, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's just going too fast, and I really don't have anything to contribute, um, which is usually the case. I'm I'm one of the head nodders.
Okay. Yeah, I could definitely see that. It's so situationally based and content based and that kind of thing. I can see. So that actually what you said reminds me of the time that I led Chick Chat. That was the perfect example of facilitating as a duty, like as that was my job to do that night. And so I felt perfectly comfortable doing that, not just as an extrovert, but because I had my list of talking points and we were talking about something that was my field of expertise, right? If I
Right.
even had talking points for something that was not my field, I would not have felt comfortable doing that. But because that was my field, I had my prepared notes and I was able to, as an extrovert, if you want to think of it this way, volley off of what other people said. Um, in that moment, I definitely had like the energy of being an extrovert um in that moment because that was my zone, right? If you're
Right.
not talking in your zone, your scope of practice, that's what they call it in counseling, your expertise, your field, I could definitely see how it would be kind of a slink into the background kind of situation.
Right. Yeah.
There she is. All right, we got Kayla's camera back. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, you can go ahead and welcome Kayla back in the comments. All right,
Mm.
let's move into some generalizations about introverts and extroverts. It and these generalizations, they're not stereotypes. They're definitely just putting people into boxes in this discussion that we're having. But we're going to talk about work and we're going to talk about relationships. So an introvert at work, if you think about it in the traditional sense, might excel in roles that require deeper focus, introspection, like writing, programming, research, these solo activities where they are able to put all of their energy into the single thing that they are tasked to do. And these tasks,
Yeah.
because of the extra stimulation that might be found in other jobs. So they
Hmm.
often appreciate the quiet, uninterrupted environments.
Definitely.
So I got to say, if I'm working on stuff like that, oh, there's Luna.
Oh, you could see her.
I can. That's okay. We always need a puppy break. My bird. I want to pet her. Anyways, the quiet, uninterrupted environment, it definitely depends on what I am working on. Like as a extrovert, I'm not gonna say that I don't like a quiet working environment, but it just depends on what I'm doing. If I'm in a collaborative project, well then no, a quiet working environment's not gonna work for me.
Yeah.
But I can't say that just because I'm an extrovert and I haven't even gotten to that one yet. I just talked about introvert, but that I have to have a loud environment. Like I can't work at a coffee shop. I cannot, I can't focus. Kara, my sister, she loves working in coffee shops. And I would say she falls into the introvert category, whereas I cannot do it. So, well, let me finish this work and then we can get into the discussion about it. But an extrovert at work, it, according to the research, says they might thrive in roles involving teamwork, leadership, public speaking, all those things that you would expect, brainstorming, all that kind of stuff, and being the face of a project. That's an interesting thing we can get into in a second. But just to jump back to what I was ranting about before, as an extrovert, I just think that's so interesting that my sister, who's an introvert, and I, as an extrovert, enjoy completely opposite working environments.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me.
Hmm.
It's definitely situation based because again, I can only speak to my own life and people I'm close to, but like my sister has no problem getting up and being the face of a project if she has to. Is that her preference? I don't know. I guess it depends on the project, but she as an introvert and I as an extrovert still have the swapping different types of experiences with things just because of what the situation demands.
Yeah.
Now you come from a big family, and so I'm sure you've got a fine representation of both introverts and extroverts. Um,
Yeah.
and not that we have to focus on family, but if what do you think? What do you think about all that?
It does depend on the situation. I have a couple siblings that like they are extroverted no matter. I mean, you could put them in a room of 1,000 people that they don't know, and they will walk out with like five best friends. So, like, I have those siblings, and they will turn everything into um. I mean, they can sit there and make you spill all your guts and cry. So
Yeah.
they'll get it out of you. But I do have a couple more siblings that are more like me, and like we prefer to you know, go home after a big event and like get fast food and just chill together.
Mm-hmm.
On the work side of things, if I'm put in a position where I am dubbed like the leader and I'm supposed to like take the lead with this project, then I will, and I'll do it with energy. Um we had a new guy recently come on the team, and my boss put us on this big email, and she said, all right, Kayla, you're going to take the reins from here, and you're going to explain this, this, and this. And usually that would make me very nervous, and I wouldn't volunteer to do that. If
Mm-hmm.
she said, who wants to volunteer to do this, I wouldn't be the volunteer. But since she said, you are going to be the one to do this, I had to kind of push through that shyness, if you will. And it was over email too, so it was, I mean, it wasn't too bad.
Mm-hmm.
But I was able to do that, and I feel like I did very well. So
Yeah,
it does depend on the situation.
it's the situation, it's the environment. We are painting with a very broad brush here with these two categories. But as far as discussion goes, that's the best way to do it. I find myself in a new working environment too. You know, I just started my new job, and it can be very overwhelming with the tasks and that kind of thing. And if I were like super, super shy and introverted, I could see how I would have trouble asking for help and that kind of thing. So that's another thing. And I think we're going to get into that a little bit later. If not, we'll just touch on it right now. But um, it's all about the intrinsic push of, will you push yourself to do something that you're not comfortable with, whether that is an introvert or an extrovert. So you find yourself as like a quote unquote team lead in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
probably maybe stretched you a little bit in a way that you weren't expecting, but that didn't stop you, that didn't make you stop being an introvert or more introverted or whatever you want to call yourself. It's just the situation that you found yourself in. So we're going to talk a little bit about both right now. We've been talking about either or, but now we're going to talk about them both. All right, let's move into a conversation about both of these topics together. We're going to talk about the self-acceptance and growth aspects of embracing these traits, because both introversion and extroversion have their strengths. One is not better, one is not worse. I saw a meme a few months ago about how introverts always hear, you're so shy, you're so quiet, blah blah blah, and then they're like, for once I want to tell an extrovert, you're so loud, you're so annoying, you know.
Right.
Like, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be shy and quiet or loud and annoying, right?
Yeah.
They both have strengths,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not, it's people, right? It's people and how they choose to expel their energy and how they choose to recharge their energy. It's all comes back to the human aspect of it. It's not like a label where you're an introvert, you're an extrovert, right? It's
Right.
just, it's a one more, that's just a label, right? But we don't want to get caught up in the label of our emotions and our energy and that kind of thing. So introverts' ability to maybe think deeply does not mean that extroverts don't have that ability. It's all about the environment.
Mm-hmm.
The capacity for building connections does not negate someone's ability to think deeply, or vice versa. If you're thinking on a higher plane or whatever, that doesn't mean that you can't connect with people. It's just not where your strength lies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you'll find personal and professional success as both of these types of people. Got to have a balance. Individuals can benefit from embracing the qualities of the other end of the spectrum. So you pushing yourself out of your comfort zone to help the new person is an inevitable benefit, right? An
Right.
extrovert's ability to sit down and have quiet moments of reflection and work and personal space will help them in the long run,
Yeah.
and to appreciate the solitude.
Right.
It's not one or the other. It's learning to embrace everything that makes you who you are and trying new things, whether you are the loud and obnoxious one or the shy and quiet one, right? Those generalizations. All right, let's get into a hot button issue that we seem to hear about a lot these days, is the cultural and gender aspect of these things. We're not going to go too crazy deep into it, but just to skate over it, in some cultures it's a cultural norm to be one or the other, right? So maybe in a
Mm-hmm.
culture extroversion is valued more, leading to introverts feeling pressure to conform. So like, I don't have an example because I haven't done the research to know what cultures are like that, but if you find yourself in a culture where extroversion is valued more and you feel pressure to conform, you will end up boxing yourself in and maybe shutting down parts of yourself that just could have been just as effective or helpful or anything like that to your community, but because you felt pressure to change because of your culture, um, they could be losing out on so many beneficial aspects of an introvert or an extrovert, depending on what it is, what side of the coin the culture falls on. Just lose out on whatever contribution that could be for their culture. On the gender side of things, this one makes a little bit more sense because we all fall into male or female. Society's gender norms might influence how introversions and extroversions are expressed. For example, in some areas of the world, this also goes back to your culture, extroverted behavior might be encouraged more in men.
Yeah.
I know I've been in situations where it's like the women need to be quiet and listen and whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
everyone needs to be quiet and listen at some points, and everyone needs to speak up and contribute at others. To have
Yeah.
a fully functioning environment and society, you have to have both genders that God created
Mm-hmm.
contribute in some way in order to be effective.
Well, and to live like a human existence the way God intended,
Yeah.
you know, you need to be the one speaking up and you need to be the one listening
Yeah.
at different points. Yeah.
And I don't think it's a gender thing to say, okay, one of these genders needs to sit down and shut down and not be heard, because it's all about the situation. It's all
Mm-hmm.
about what the outcome is supposed to be. I've been in situations where it's been only women, and some women get crazy when they don't feel like the weight of responsibility of their job or their family or their house or whatever, and they get crazy. But you know what? I'm not going to fault them for that because that's their chance to express themselves. If I have issue with it, guess what? I will remove myself and let them have their fun. And I'm sure it's the same thing for guys, that in certain environments guys might shut down where loud and abrasive guys are, because they're like, oh, I don't want to be associated as that type of guy.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, the environment is not going to be all the time. It's going to be sporadic. It's going to be like women's retreats or men's conferences or stuff like that. So just knowing how to embrace both ends of the spectrum and be okay when other people are expressing themselves how they need to in the moment. If you don't like it, find yourself in a different environment.
Yeah.
That really goes back to, you don't have to try to control someone else's expression because that's not what you want to be around. Like, you can fix that for yourself. You don't have to fix that for someone else. That's a little soapbox I have.
Love it.
All right, we are rolling now. We got two more things we're going to hit on with this conversation before we wrap up today's episode number 5. Let's talk about harnessing the power of both traits. We've talked about this a little bit throughout the episode, but we're going to pull focus to it. Balancing social interaction and solitude. Introverts can learn to enjoy socializing without feeling drained, while extroverts can practice mindfulness and introspection to avoid burnout. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so introverts can learn to enjoy socializing. It needs to be with the right people. You can't
Yes.
just throw an introvert into a group of people that they don't like and expect them to be like, hey, you got to learn how to socialize. That's not to say introverts don't know how to socialize. Everyone gets to pick when they express themselves and when they like. Yeah, I don't agree with the idea that all introverts are quiet and oddballs and don't know how to talk to people. That is not the case. But in learning to enjoy it in order to embrace the eventual strength that you will gain by, it's just like muscles. If I want to work this muscle out over and over, I will eventually get strong because I did it repetitively. So if I find myself as an introvert in situations where I will get stronger and stronger, then hey, eventually that'll be my strength. Whereas extroverts can practice mindfulness and introspection so that they're not going, and then like they're gone, right? Like
Right.
they can't be, their strengths are not their strengths anymore because they pushed them so hard. Now it's a weakness. So adapting to situations is developing the ability to switch between the two sides of yourself or the spectrum, slide up and down the spectrum, um, and just learning the context, learning the environment, learning what your best self is for the moment.
So how can someone practice making room for both and like learning to channel your correct side at the correct time?
That actually is our last, that's our last point. We're drawing it to a close here because that's how we,
Perfect.
that's how we're wrapping up today, um is kind of like how do we navigate the world for our strengths, for a world that might be built just for extroverts. It seems like, how can an introvert thrive? Well, in reality, the world is a multitude of situations and environments and that kind of thing. So if you're a leader, okay, design a space that caters to both introverts and extroverts. So like as a teacher, okay, when I was in a physical classroom, now I'm in a virtual classroom, but when I was in a physical classroom, I had quiet reading spaces and collaboration stations and that kind of stuff, so that kids who don't even know if they're an introvert or an extrovert at that age will gravitate to what they like,
Mm,
right? So
yeah, I like that.
because that way they'll get to know other kids in this situation, but then they'll also discover their love for reading in a quiet zone where Johnny is not, bouncing off and up and down the walls over here. And so
That's my zone.
yeah, there you go. It'll, at that young of an age, it's really important for a classroom to dedicate space to both, because like I said, they don't even know what they are. They don't even know if they're an introvert or an extrovert.
Mm,
Um, so in a louder spot, in a loud, bustling environment, have a quiet place. And it doesn't have to be something, weird or like, this is our
yeah.
sensitive zone, just like have a have a space, right? Like a,
Mhm.
and typically I would say that extroverts know how to find that space for themselves in a loud environment or whatever,
Yeah.
or in a typically quiet environment. So like if you think about a library and how they have some of those glassed off offices, like you can
Hmm.
sign up and rent, or not rent, but sign up for a space or whatever.
Yeah.
That is in a quiet environment where collaboration can take place. So that way extroverts are not excluded from the library atmosphere, but they can still be themselves there. um you got your different methods of communication. If you are a leader in your workplace, don't demand that every single person jump on Zoom if they've got a question.
Right.
Let them instant message, let them email, that is expecting introverts to have a face-to-face conversation every single time they have a simple question. So provide opportunity for both expressions to thrive in your environment. And we mostly talked
Hmm.
about work related things, but in your homes, obviously I'm not going to tell you how to set up your home, but like if you're throwing a party and you've got a bunch, like say you're having a game night, don't have exclusively group games. What if this person wants to play, you know
One
a
on
card
one.
game,
Yeah.
yeah, one-on-one, like
Yeah.
a card game with just one person, so that
Yep.
they can have a conversation while they're doing it. It's that
Yeah.
kind of things that you think about, like, I love a group game, but that doesn't mean that every single person I invite to my party is going to love a group game. So
Yes.
being aware of having options so that
Mhm.
everyone feels comfortable and welcome, in this case, in my home.
Right. And different kinds of games too.
Yeah.
So ones that are like just solely based on skill, and then the other ones that are um like the game of things where it's
Hmm.
like, oh my word, I had to think of something so clever right now.
Yeah.
I'm not that funny,
Yeah.
you know?
Skill games, versus like games of luck and chance and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Definitely, I know as a person who likes games of skill, I get really frustrated when I don't do well at them. But then I also get frustrated at a game of luck when I don't do well at it. But that is more of a welcoming game for everyone, so that we don't have people who are like, feel, oh, I'm not smart enough to do this, and then they suddenly feel excluded from your game night, right? So yeah, I absolutely agree that you need to have a good mix of pretty much everything. Just like when your sisters come over to my house, I have a food option for them because I know that that's what they want. I'm not just like, hey, come to my house for a party, but you have to starve, because it's like,
We're
you're,
having beef and cheese.
yeah, you know your friends, at least you should know your friends, and you know what it will take to help them have a good time. So whether you are an introvert or an extrovert, I hope you learned something today. And like I said 150 times, and I will say it one more for the road, it's not either or, it's a spectrum. You fall somewhere in there. And not only is it a spectrum, it's a sliding spectrum based off of the environment. If you're in an environment where you are more comfortable, guess what? You're going to slide to the extroverted side of the scale. Whereas a group of 150 people, you might slide more to the introverted scale. It's not just a spectrum, it's also a sliding spectrum, a scale, if you will, a weighted scale. And you will find yourself in different places. But if you learned anything from this episode, first of all, that's great. We love that. But if you also have any comments or anything, feel free to send us an email, friendeavorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any thoughts you have, questions that you have, ideas for future episodes, something that you've been wanting to learn about. Hey, send us an email. We'd love to research it, and of course, mix in a little bit of our opinion and and get that out for you guys.
And if you're not already, go ahead and follow us on Instagram at Friendeavor. We post about our resources, and we post little tips and tricks for navigating the ups and downs of friendship. Go check it out.
Yeah. And I don't know if we've actually gone over this yet in the podcast. This is only our 5th episode, but I wanted to lay out the structure for you guys. So we are planning to, obviously this is a brand new podcast, so we're still learning and we're still navigating, but we're planning on doing 35 episodes in this first season. So stretching all the way to around May. So make sure you tune in every week, and please help us get the word out. Share with a friend, share with an enemy. We don't care either way. Hopefully we'll help you make your enemies your friends by the end of the listening to this podcast. But yeah, we just really, really appreciate you listening. Next week on the podcast, I am thrilled. We have our very first guest. Kayla, do you want to tell us who our guest is?
Our guest is Carissa King from Dear Young Married Couple, and she's going to be talking to us about why your spouse can't be your only friend. And I'm super excited for this one.
I can't wait. We are going to be recording with her in person. Kayla and I do it digitally right now just because that's what works for us, but we will be with her in person. Carissa King from Dear Young Married Couple. We are thrilled to have her on the podcast, and we will see you next week on Friendeavor the podcast.
All right, see you guys next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Friendeavor the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed today's content, leave a review and share with a friend. You can find the show notes on our website, www.friendeavor.net, and in the description of this episode.
Friendship is a journey. It's an endeavor. We'll see you next time on Friendeavor.